Canadian tourism to America is collapsing, and it's hitting the U.S. economy like a sledgehammer. While President Trump threatens to make Canada the 51st state, Canadians are responding with their wallets, staying home in unprecedented numbers. We're talking about a tourism boycott that's costing billions of dollars and thousands of American jobs. So what exactly is happening at the world's longest undefended border? And why is this tourism war escalating into something much bigger than anyone expected? To understand the magnitude of this economic earthquake, we need to look at the numbers, and they're staggering. Canadian residents made just 1.7 million return trips by motor vehicle back into their country from the U.S. In July, a nearly 37% drop from the same month in 2024, according to Statistics Canada. But the motor vehicle decline is just the beginning. Canadians returning from the U.S. by air dropped 22.1% in June alone. June was the sixth consecutive month of year-over-year automobile declines, painting a picture of sustained economic protest that shows no signs of slowing down. The scale of this tourism collapse becomes even more dramatic when you consider advance bookings. Advance bookings for Canada-US flights in April-September were down over 70% compared to the same period in the previous year, according to aviation data provider OAG. That's not a temporary dip. That's a systematic rejection of American destinations by Canadian travelers. What makes this situation so economically devastating is Canada's position as America's #1 source of international tourism. The U.S. saw 20.4 million visits from Canadians last year, making Canada the top source of international tourists to the United States, generating $20.5 billion in spending and supporting 140,000 U.S. jobs. Think about that for a moment. Canada alone accounts for more international visitors to America than any other country on Earth. But this isn't happening in a vacuum. The tourism boycott is a direct response to Trump's escalating rhetoric and economic warfare against Canada. The dip in Canadian tourists follows a turbulent political year that saw President Donald Trump campaign to make the country the 51st state. The president hasn't just threatened annexation, he's backed it up with punitive economic measures and aggressive diplomatic posturing that has fundamentally altered the relationship between these longtime allies.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Peace efforts in the war between Russia and Ukraine shift to the White House next week when President Trump meets with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Their talks come as Mr. Trump has now aligned himself with Russian President Vladimir Putin, dropping his demand for a ceasefire and backing a comprehensive agreement to end the war instead. Hours after meeting with Putin in Alaska, Mr. Trump announced his sudden reversal on Truth Social. It was determined by all that the best way to end the horrific war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly to a peace agreement, which would end the war, and not a mere ceasefire agreement. Earlier, the president had told Fox News' Sean Hannity that the responsibility is now on others.
Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done. And I would also say the European nations, they have to get involved a little bit.
And now for analysis of all of this, Andrea Kendall Taylor. She's a former senior intelligence officer. She's now a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security. Andrea, in addition to sort of flip-flopping, you're changing his position on the ceasefire, there are now reports that he's told European leaders that he now supports Russia's demand for territory for peace. Where does this leave the peace effort?
Well, I think this was the big concern going into the Alaska meeting, that President Trump would, in fact, come around to Putin's point of view and join on to his demands, and then force that deal on Ukraine and the Europeans. And then if they reject a deal that's unjust and unfair to Ukraine, will turn around and reassign blame to Ukraine. You know, I think we're perhaps even in a worse position than we were going in, because I'm exceptionally concerned that now, after months of suggesting he would ramp up pressure on Russia, that Trump is once again reversing course and is going to apply.
President Trump, shortly after taking office in January, said he would impose 25% tariffs on many Canadian goods and repeated his wish to turn the country into the 51st U.S. state. And Canadians have taken these threats personally. The response from Canadian leadership has been swift and coordinated. In February, then Prime Minister Our Justin Trudeau called for Canadians to not spend their money on vacations in the US, instead asking them to choose Canada and change their summer vacation plans to stay here in Canada and explore the many national and provincial parks, historical sites, and tourist destinations our great country has to offer. This wasn't just political posturing, it was a call for economic nationalism that Canadians have answered in droves. The individual stories behind these statistics reveal the depth of Canadian anger and disappointment. Lena Yousefi and her family typically visit Hawaii 4 or 5 times a year. The Vancouver attorney used to live in Maui and had booked another trip for this year. Obviously, out of loyalty to Canada and our values and just holding our ground, we had to cancel, Yousefi said. Her family was even considering buying property in Hawaii, but Trump's rhetoric changed everything. The emotional impact goes beyond economics. I feel that I have been slapped across the face by this president, one Canadian tourist told PBS NewsHour. The anger is not with the American people. The anger is with Donald Trump. And the feeling is that if he is going to go to war with Canada, something we never asked for, an economic war, then why on earth would they spend a nickel in the United States when they don't have to? The geographic impact of this boycott is hitting some American states harder than others. Florida, California, Nevada, New York, and Texas tend to be the most popular states for Canadian visitors, making them particularly vulnerable to this tourism collapse. Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International in Florida saw a 20% decrease in April arrivals from Canada, representing millions in lost revenue for a state that depends heavily on tourism dollars. The ripple effects are being felt in communities across the northern border. On a typical day at Bluff Point Golf Resort in Plattsburgh, NY, you used to be able to spot around 20 or 30 cars from Quebec or Ontario in the parking lot. But over the last several months, at the business just 25 minutes from the US-Canada border, it has been more like 1 or 2 cars. It's tough because we've developed this relationship with the cross-border economy, Dame said. The economic mathematics of this tourism war are sobering for the American economy. The U.S. Travel Association estimated that even a 10% reduction in Canadian tourism to the U.S. would spell a $2.1 billion drop in spending and a loss of 14,000 American jobs. But we're not looking at a 10% reduction. We're looking at declines of 20%, 30%, and in some cases, over 70% in advance bookings. Tourism Economics expects a 15% decline in travel from Canada this year, translating to $3.3 billion in lost spending. And it's not just Canada. An expanded trade war ensnaring Canada, Mexico, China, and even Europe could result in a $22 billion loss in tourism revenue from international visitors, according to Tourism Economics. Travel industry professionals are witnessing this collapse firsthand. Mackenzie McMillan, a Vancouver-based advisor with the travel group, said his company would typically be busy this time of year, arranging last-minute spring break and summer trips for Canadians to such favorite spots as San Diego, Palm Springs, California, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. Instead, he said, it's zero. The steep drop-off started gradually, with some clients in January saying they were thinking they might avoid the U.S. this year. Since February, it's been a complete collapse, he said. The numbers from his company tell the story of systematic rejection. About 20% to 30% of trips that were already booked got canceled. Since then, the company has seen about a 90% drop in new bookings for U.S. vacations compared with the previous year. The timing couldn't be worse for the American tourism industry. This all comes as the tourism industry continues to dig out of the hole left by the COVID-19 pandemic, which clobbered the hospitality sector. American Bus Association President Fred Ferguson says there are still more American tourists leaving the country than there are foreign visitors coming in, but Canadian travelers are helping lessen that deficit. Now, that crucial source of recovery is evaporating. The broader international picture is equally concerning. Foreign arrivals to the U.S. by air have fallen 2.5% so far this year through April from a year ago. The biggest drop, 10%, came in March after Trump announced tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico. Trump's policies have prompted a travel boycott from Canadians, the largest group of visitors, and anti-American sentiment is on the rise in Europe. the aviation industry is responding to this demand collapse with capacity cuts. Air France, British Airways, and Lufthansa are all cutting flights to destinations such as Atlanta, Las Vegas, Miami, and New York. When major international airlines start cutting routes to American cities, you know the tourism damage is real and sustained.
Welcome to the News Hour. A New York appeals court today dismissed a $500 million civil fraud penalty against President Donald Trump and his companies for overvaluing their properties and financial statements. In the ruling, the judges upheld the fraud judgment, but said, quote, the $500 million to the state of New York is an excessive fine that violates the 8th Amendment of the United States Constitution.
The case centers on allegations that Mr. Trump misled banks and insurers by inflating or deflating the value of his assets when it suited him and exaggerated his net worth by billions of dollars. New York State Attorney General Letitia James says she plans to appeal the ruling. For more on the impact of the decision, I spoke earlier with former federal prosecutor Jessica Roth, currently a professor at Cardozo School of Law. Jessica Roth, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So this was a lengthy ruling, more than 300 pages. What were the main points of contention among the judges, and how did their differing opinions shape the outcome?
Yeah, so this was a complicated split decision. As you noted, it's over 300 pages, and we have 3 opinions, and the reasoning of the judges divided 2, 2, and 1. There was one point of commonality among all the justices, and that was that the trial court's order could not stand as it was written. But beyond there, we had disagreement among the justices. The effect of the decision of the appellate division today is to affirm the judgment, right, the verdict against Trump, his sons, their business associates, and their businesses, finding them liable under New York's civil fraud law of engaging in.
The financial markets are taking notice too, with major travel companies warning about the impact on their bottom lines. What makes this situation particularly concerning is that it's not just about the immediate economic impact, it's about the long-term relationship between the world's longest, undefended border. Prime Minister Mark Carney said after his Liberal Party was re-elected on Monday, the old relationship of integration with the U.S. was over. This represents a fundamental shift in the North American relationship that has defined both countries for generations. The tariffs themselves are making American destinations even less attractive to Canadian visitors. The tariff situation means that someone buying beer from us just coming for the day, they will pay not just the provincial tax, but they will now pay a 25% additional tariff. They're paying 43% above cost to bring beer back. When a simple cross-border shopping trip becomes economically punitive, tourism naturally follows. Some American officials are trying to downplay the crisis. Governor Ron DeSantis, R., said Tuesday during a news conference that he wasn't worried about early reports of Canadians not coming to Florida because he and his family were at Legoland. In Central Florida a couple weeks ago, and 80% of the people stopping him for pictures were Canadians. So, he said, the Canadians are coming. We're going to continue to be a tourist hotspot. But the data tells a different story than anecdotal encounters at theme parks. The global tourism forecasts paint a grim picture for American destinations. Before Trump took office, analysts expected 2025 to be a bumper year for U.S. tourism, with almost 79 million foreign visitors. But given the political turmoil, research company Tourism Economics has scaled back its forecast to 66 million as global travelers increasingly choose alternate destinations. That's a difference of 13 million visitors, a massive economic loss. The group expects the largest pullback from Canadians, with visits plunging about 20% this year, and the numbers from Western Europe will drop 5.8%. The corporate travel sector is also feeling the impact.
Walk off the job for the picket line to back contract demands. CUPE says the company hasn't come to the table for new talks, while the airline wants Ottawa to force binding arbitration.
We don't think that a third party should be coming in to save the day once again for Air Canada, swoop in and not let them negotiate.
The two sides are battling it out over wages, with the company offering a package it says would make its flight attendants the best paid in Canada. Meantime, the labor unrest at Canada Post continues. Meetings scheduled for today between the union and the national mail carrier have been postponed, with the federal mediators in those talks now tied up with the Air Canada dispute. And at the University of Windsor, Unifor Local 444 says that 20...
Meanwhile, the broader implications for business travel are becoming apparent as companies reassess their North American operations. Airbnb, Booking.com, and Expedia have all cautioned that their financial results will be weaker than expected because of softening demand in the U.S. When the major online travel platforms are warning investors about weakening American demand, the tourism crisis has reached the highest levels of the industry. What's particularly striking about this tourism boycott is how it represents a form of economic diplomacy that individual citizens can practice. When governments impose tariffs and threaten annexation, ordinary people can respond by choosing where to spend their vacation dollars. And Canadians are making their choice clear. They're choosing anywhere but America. The psychological impact of Trump's rhetoric cannot be understated. This threat of annexation by this very powerful militarized ally, we took it very, very seriously, and honestly, it's frightening. One Canadian told PBS NewsHour, "When your closest ally and trading partner starts talking about annexation, tourism becomes the least of your concerns. National sovereignty does." Some regions are trying to fight back against the tourism decline. In June, Maine Governor Janet Mills made an official visit to Canada to urge Canadians to visit her border state. Maine, which saw nearly 800,000 Canadian visits in 2024, also installed new road signs welcoming travelers from the north, reading, "Bienvenue Canadians." But individual state efforts may not be enough to overcome the broader political damage from federal rhetoric and policies. The immigration enforcement concerns are adding another layer to Canadian hesitation about U.S. travel. Some are nervous about crossing the border amid an immigration crackdown that has gained widespread attention in Canada. When tourists start worrying about immigration enforcement during routine visits, the welcoming image of American tourism takes a serious hit. The currency exchange rate is also working against American tourism recovery. The unfavorable exchange rate doesn't help make American destinations more attractive to Canadian visitors, who are already dealing with 25% tariffs on goods they might purchase. The business community in border regions is feeling the pain most acutely. Leah Mueller, Vice President of Sales and Services at Visit Buffalo Niagara, said tourism companies in her region have been feeling the impact of a drop in Canadian travel too, from smaller tour groups to tour boats with fewer passengers. It's a decline that's not stopping things from happening, but it is affecting the revenue that people are collecting, she said. The long-term implications of this tourism war extend far beyond immediate economic losses. Tourism industry leaders say it's too early to tell how much of an impact would be felt by a dip in Canadian tourism, but estimates suggest the U.S. has a lot to lose if Canadians snub the states en masse. Canada has been one of the bright spots post-COVID of closing the gap, but I think with the rhetoric, with the news, we are going to see slowdowns in Canadian travel, Ferguson said. What we're witnessing is not just a temporary diplomatic spat. It's a fundamental restructuring of North American tourism patterns. When the President of the United States repeatedly calls for the annexation of a sovereign ally, threatens punitive tariffs, and creates an atmosphere of economic hostility, tourism becomes a casualty of political ambition. The question now is whether this tourism collapse will force a recalibration of American foreign policy toward Canada, or whether the economic losses will simply be accepted as the price of Trump's confrontational approach. Those economic pressures are squeezing the U.S. tourism industry just as it prepares for the busy spring and summer travel seasons. We're just now kind of ramping up to be hosting this influx of visitation. And I think people are really concerned that if this rhetoric continues, which seemingly it is, people are just going to say, you know what, we're not coming. The Canadian tourism boycott of America represents something unprecedented in modern North American relations, a systematic economic response by ordinary citizens to political rhetoric they find threatening and offensive. With billions of dollars in tourism revenue at stake and thousands of American jobs hanging in the balance, this boycott has evolved from a political statement into an economic force that's reshaping the entire U.S. tourism industry. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how Trump's trade wars are affecting other sectors of the American economy, check out our other videos. And if you want to stay updated on how international relations are reshaping global economics and tourism, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analyses and breaking news.